What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the PikaPikaPaPa, and here we are looking at some awesome booster box prices and really throwing them through a future projections calculator and seeing where the math thinks they might land in the next 3 months. Now, I was really kind of pumping this video hard in yesterday's video where we talked about Sword and Shield, and it's not because the Sword and Shield results weren't awesome. They absolutely were. Like, it was a super cool video, super cool trends, but the Sun and Moon set is different, right? Like, we started trending this data in January of 2022, right? Like in January of 2022, Sword and Shield was still relatively new, right? Like there were a lot of sets that were still less than 2 years old at that point. And when we started doing this for Sun and Moon at the exact same time, these sets were far more mature, right? Like we had no concerns about any of them being reprinted or restocked. They had been out of print for a while, so it's really cool to see how these performed because the math, you know, it really likes stability. And those early sets in the Sun and Moon era, you know, where they were still going through some of that Pokemon pop and flop, it led to some pretty crazy price predictions. And I will tell you this, we have some equal crazy price predictions here, but they are absolutely fascinating to look at and talk through. So what does all that mean? What do we do here? Where, listen, I warehouse tons of data. This is just a high level view of all of these Sun and Moon booster boxes and their final month booster box price for the last 24 months. I've been warehousing this on my own. I think it's really cool. TCG Player has 12 months. Now we have 24 months worth of data. So what do I do with that? I take it and I put it into a forecast calculator here in Excel, and it gives us this really cool graph where the blue line represents where the price have been over the last 24 months, right? The blue line is what has happened. Then you have that orange line right there. The orange line is a forecast, right? Now, let me say this. This data comes from TCG Player, right? I pull it straight from there. So if you don't like the data, don't hate me, hate TCG Player. And the forecasting tool that I use is in Microsoft Excel that any of you can do. So again, this isn't like some back of napkin math that PikaPikaPaPa does. You know, this is from a known good data set with a known good equation. So it is really cool to see when you take these 24 months worth of data, put it into this forecasting tool, and see where the math thinks some of these booster boxes are gonna end up. Now, I set it for the next 3 months because we do it every single quarter, and obviously we've done this a lot. We've done it for a whole year, so we have a lot of results. Now, one of the cool things is here in Sun and Moon, so when you see those orange lines, there's the top one, which is the upper confidence bound, the bottom one, which is the lower confidence bound. So basically, these are just the upper and bottom parts where the math thinks that the price could go. It says, hey, it could go as high as this, or it could go as low as this. Then that solid orange line in the middle, that's the actual forecast. That's where the math says, okay, listen, it could go this high, it could go this low, but it's gonna put a line in the sand and say, hey, this is the actual number that we think this booster box is gonna end up at in the next 3 months. Now, over the last year of us doing this, 88% of the time, this math has, the actual booster box price has beat this lower confidence bound. And then in this space, in the Sun and Moon space, much stronger results than in the Sword and Shield space, 80% of the time, the actual booster box price has beaten the forecast. Now, guess what? In this video, every single booster box price beats forecast, which is absolutely insane. And listen, only 3 of them were close. All of the rest of them absolutely blew it out of the water. So that's why I'm so excited about this. Not only excited about the results, not only about the fact that, hey, there might be something here, you know, as sets start to mature, we might actually be able to use this data, right, to give us some real price projections of what might actually happen. But what's interesting for me, and you're gonna see as we get into this, is it's starting to cause some seasonality trends to come out, right? Remember, we have January, February, March of 2022 and 2023 in here, and we're projecting out January, February, March of 2024. So it's taken the way these products have moved in those 2 time periods of those last 2 years, and it's projecting it out. Of course, it uses current trends as a part of the equation as well. But it's really fascinating for this, and someday I dream of being able to use this, you know, when Scarlet and Violet starts to come of age, and we'll be able to get some really buttoned up prices for that too. So hey, listen, if that kind of stuff excites you, we do this every quarter, but we do tons of fun data dives on this channel. So if you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, go ahead and do it. We do all kinds of fun stuff like this. If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up. Questions or comments, drop them down below. I appreciate those things, 3 small things, more than you can possibly know, and it goes a long way in helping my channel out. So thank you for that in advance. Now, let's get into some of the data. You've already seen Cosmic Eclipse, right? I already showed you the graph before. So what I'm going to use is this first slide to kind of explain all of the color-coded nonsense down below there. So And that big green box that says actual with the bold number next to it, that's going to show you the final price of the booster box in December of 2023. So Cosmic Eclipse booster boxes ended the year at $867. Now, below that, you'll see where I have the box right there. It's kind of outlined. I have a black square around it. The orange number, that $877.87, is where the math thinks that the booster box price will be at the end of the next 3 months. So we're talking about March of 2024. The orange or the red box right there, that is the lower confidence bound, we talked about it. It's going to give you an upper and lower confidence bound, right? So the lower confidence bound says, hey, listen, if Cosmic Eclipse does go down, we think it could go down as far as 12% to $763.81. And then to the right of that is the green. That's the upper confidence bound right there. So it says, hey, listen, if things get really, really bullish, we think Cosmic Eclipse could go as high as $991.92 or up 14% in the next couple months. Now, I think that's pretty aggressive growth, right? Especially since if you look at this blue graph right here, you'll see that Cosmic Eclipse was really flat for January, February, March of 2022. And really in 2023 is when Cosmic Eclipse really started that nice, smooth, upward in the right trajectory. But over the last couple months, it's actually started to flatten out a little bit. And I've shared my opinion on Cosmic Eclipse a lot. I still think you can find packs out in the wild pretty easily. I love the lineup of the cards, but for me, almost $900 for a booster box is a little rich for my blood. So maybe it'll continue to flatten out. The math doesn't have a lot of upside, right? Current booster box at the end of December was $867, and the forecast is only $877. So it's not predicting a huge gain, but we shall see. I think it'd be safe to see this flatten out. I think it got a little hot, a little fast, so it'll be interesting to see when we do this relook back in 3 months and see where it shapes out at. Now, the next one right here is Unified Mind, right? Unified Minds had a really slow ramp, and I am such a huge fan of Unified Minds. I love everything about this set. I think the cards and the Pokemon that are featured in it are absolutely awesome. But look what happened in really March of 2023. Look at how that blue line goes from a slow and steady, almost kind of like a flat growth, then it just kind of shoots up like a rocket ship. Now remember, this math takes into account what happened in January, February, March of 2022. And if you look all the way to the left, you'll see that in January, February, March of 2022, Unified Minds was actually coming down from a booster box price perspective. So yes, it has a high upside to it. You see that big gap there at the end, the high orange line, the low orange line, and the one in the middle. But at the end of the day, it's going to take that into consideration. And you see how it's starting to flatten out here. And that's going to be a theme we'll talk about a lot in this video, is just Sun and Moon booster boxes have been incredibly hot. They can't go up forever, right? It just doesn't happen in any kind of investing space. There's no investment that goes up into the right forever. So could we starting to enter a period where these booster boxes starting to flatten out a little bit? We shall see. So again, another one, it crushed the old forecast coming in at $667 versus a forecast of $597. And then you look down below, the math is really protecting the downside here. The forecast is actually lower than the current price right now, but I don't think there's any way in shape or form that Unified Minds is going to drop. The lower confidence bound says it could go down 15%. The upper confidence bound says it could go up 13%. I do think it's going to be up in the next 3 months. It might not see explosive growth, but I certainly don't think it's going to go down. But it's really interesting to see how the math has interpreted previous trends, and current trends to see what it thinks it'll do in the next couple months. Next one right here is Unbroken Bonds. And honestly, it's interesting to see. Look how flat Unbroken Bonds, really from May of 2022 all the way to June of 2023, this set was absolutely flat right below the $500 mark, which was really interesting for me to see. We talk about how hot all of these Sun and Moon booster boxes have been for so long, but when you actually see the graphical representation of their booster box prices over time, a lot of these were flat for a long time. And hey, maybe it was a missed opportunity on my part or some of us out there where it could have been an opportunity to get some of these booster boxes. $500 is a lot for a booster box, but hey, look at what it's done really over the last 6 months, right? It's all the way up to almost $600 now, blew the forecast out of the water. Another one where it's looking at the previous year's performance. Like look at January, February, March of 2022, the booster box price was coming down. Even January, February, March of 2023, guess what? The booster box price was coming down again. Like absolutely interesting. We might even start seeing some seasonality patterns. I have some ideas for some seasonality videos. I think I've got the data sets put together, so I think that'll be a ton of fun for us to look at further down the road. But that's why you see the math really skewed to the downside, right? Because the last two January, February, March periods in 2022 and 2023, Unbroken Bonds actually came down in price from a sealed booster box perspective. And when we check this again 3 months from now, if it did it again, that'll just be absolutely amazing to see, but it'll be interesting to watch nonetheless. Now, the next one right here, the set that just doesn't stop. Frickin' Team Up has been on fire, but it's hard to believe when we started all the way back in January of 2022, the booster box was right at $750, and today it's north of $2,000. Absolutely insane. Again, another one that just absolutely destroyed the forecast, but what you see is sometimes when these sets get really, really hot for a prolonged period of time, the math will actually bake in a little bit of downside. The math seems to know, hey, listen, this thing has been really hot for a long time. It might not be able to continue it. And when you look at the forecast down below, it's saying it's going to get up to $244 in the next 3 months, which you can't shake a fist at that. That's solid growth over a short period of time, but it's also protecting the downside and the upside almost equally. So you'll see that lower confidence bound is at negative 16% and the upper confidence bound is at positive 19%. When I see these when I see these bounds so close in percentage, that lets me know that the math is kind of like, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to protect both of them and give you an even split one way or the other. And I do think that Team Up, it has to slow down. Like, it absolutely has to. $2,000 for a booster box, especially one from the Sun and Moon era, is just a crazy amount of money. Like, I think of all of the other booster boxes or singular booster box that you can get for $2,000 on the market right now. No offense, no hating to anybody who's out there spending this much money on a Team Up booster box, but me personally, if I had $2,000 to spend, I would be spending it on a different booster box than Team Up. Now, the next one we're looking at right here is Lost Thunder, another set that, look how long it was under that $400 mark. I mean, from January 2022, really all the way till April of 2023, it was below the $400 mark, and then it really started to break out. Like, I think we all got to the point where all these Sun and Moon booster boxes, at least from the, the back 2/3 of the era, we all started to think, hey, these things are starting to catch fire. We all need to pile in, and everybody did. So you see that, listen, it blew by the forecast. The current forecast is up just a little bit. It's $602 at the end of December. Forecast has it at $607 at the end of March of this year. But then when you look, again, another upper and lower confidence bound that is almost equally split for Lost Thunder, right? The lower confidence bound says it could go down 12%. Upper confidence bound says it could go up 14%. So it's very interesting to see this. And again, another one where it's kind of like stair-stepped its way up, right? Like, we see that from March to April it went up, and then from June to July it went up, but it's kind of had these periods of flatness. Now, is it going to continue? It looks like the last 3 or 4 months it's been on a pretty steady curve there up and to the right, so we shall see. But I do know that the math is kind of throwing its hands in the air going, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do like it when I see that the forecast is actually positive versus the current one. That lets me say it's a little more bullish than bearish. Now, next one right here, Celestial Storm. I've been waiting for this slide because this is like my dream chart right here. Look at it. I mean, you could not draw, if you can't draw a better trend line than this. I mean, it started at $400 in January of 2022, and it has just slowly, methodically, gradually climbed all the way up to $645. Like, there has been not a lot of undulations, not a lot of unsurprising moves, and that's why when you look at the forecast down below, and when you look at the lower and upper confidence bounds down below, the math is extremely narrow, right? And it's extremely focused, and it's extremely positive. So the current price right now is $645, which actually did beat forecast just by a couple bucks, which close enough, but still not there, right? Like, close doesn't cut it. You either hit it or you don't. And then when we get down below, the new forecast is $671. But when you look at the lower confidence bound, remember, every other lower confidence bound that we've looked at up until this point has been negative. This one is actually positive. The math is so bullish on Celestial Storm that even the lower confidence bound is positive. And then the upper confidence bound is 7%. So think about that. There's only a 6% delta between the lower and upper confidence bound. That just means that the math feels really, really dialed in on this. And that's what happens when you have these really steady, really long-term growth prospects without the, sudden ups and downs and seasonality. So it's really cool to see this. This is my favorite graph out of all the Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield booster boxes that we've done so far. So really cool. And we'll have to see if it continues on this trend. Now, the next one we're talking about right here, Forbidden Light. Forbidden Light was actually getting dragged through the mud from December of 2022 all the way through May of 2023. And I remember we talked about that in some of our target videos. Like, we got to the point where, hey, we're seeing Sun and Moon booster boxes below $300, and Forbidden Light had some really cool cards in it. So we said, hey, this might be a buying opportunity. But obviously we weren't alone in that, because this really took an aggressive turn in June of 2023. Now, why do you see this huge absolute negative? Like, the math absolutely hates Forbidden Light right now, right? The current booster box price at the end of December was $393. Now the forecast is $344. Well, that's because look at where all of the losses have come from Forbidden Light over the last 2 years. January, February, March of 2022, it was down. January, February, March of 2023, it was significantly down. So the math is taking that into account. Even though it's been super bullish, even though this has been up and to the right for the last 4 or 5 months, math is black and white, and that's what it sees. And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think this booster box is going down. This is one where I completely disagree with this. This is why we have to have the human element and not just the math element, because I really think this is going to continue to climb. I'm very remorseful that I didn't buy it when it was sub $300, because I think that would have been an awesome opportunity. But again, part of the collecting and investing journey is finding lessons along the way, and this was certainly a big lesson for me. So I don't think this forecast is going to have any problem with getting hit. I think this is going to continue to go up. I think this is going to crush the upper confidence bound without even breaking a sweat. So very next one right here is Ultra Prism. Another one like Celestial Storm, it was very steady, very slow growth up until it hit July of 2023. Then it just caught fire. Now, I am going to say this. I think I'm pretty good at understanding data. I'm pretty good at understanding trends. I'm pretty good at interpreting it. I do this a lot. I do it in my professional life. But when I saw this upper lower confidence bound in the forecast for Ultra Prism, I reran the math like 7 times because it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why it's so bearish on Ultra Prism. I could understand Forbidden Light. That made a lot of sense because of the way Forbidden Light had performed in January, February, March of the previous 2 years, but I see pretty strong performance for Ultra Prism in January, February, March of 2022 and 2023. I mean, it wasn't breaking any records, but it was gaining ground, and the math now says, hey, our forecast is in the dumps for Ultra Prism. Now, doesn't make sense to me. I don't agree with it, but who knows? We'll have to wait for the next 3 months. But I did on this one want to raise my hand and just say, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. I don't know what's going on, but the math is the math, so we shall see. The very next one right here is Crimson Invasion. This is one that we're getting back on the make sense train, right? Like you look January, February, March of 2022, it had pretty strong growth, and then January, February, March of 2023, it was actually a little bit down. Now this is one that did beat the last forecast. Last forecast was 200 bucks. That was sitting at the end of December at 206. The forecast here is down a little bit. It says it's going to be at $203. The lower confidence bound is -9%, and the upper confidence bound is +7%. So it does have a little bit of a bearish turn to it, but we'll just have to see. When you look at the last 3 months, how that blue line is starting to crescent a little bit, right? It's starting to curve down a little bit. I don't know if that's a trend that's going to continue. We're not talking about a big change, right? Like the forecast is only $3 less than the current price for the next 3 months. So it'll be interesting to see how this shapes out. You know, Crimson Invasion isn't exactly the biggest set in the Sun and Moon era, so we shall see. At some point, I certainly think that these sets are just going to organically go up in price simply because of their age, and because I think a lot of people like me, I still love Sun and Moon, and I'm still always looking for great booster box value in that space. So it'll be interesting to see where this one shakes up. Next one right here is Burning Shadows. Now, Burning Shadows obviously benefits from having that big Zard chase card, but this is interesting. We see another one where it's just, it had this spike and then it came down and then it continued to come down. Then it started to gradually go back up. Now it's starting to come back down again. Like that blue line has no clue what it's doing. It has been all over the place. And what's really interesting about that is if you watch the video from yesterday, Darkness Ablaze did the exact same thing. Now you can't compare the two because the Zard from Darkness Ablaze is nothing compared to the Zard from Burning Shadows, right? But they did follow a similar path in the fact that there was a lot of really sharp twists and turns along the way, and I have a feeling these booster boxes kind of trend with the Charizard market as a whole and how people are going after, you know, the big Charizard chase card in here. But with that being said, you know, the forecast is positive. It's at $415 at the end of December. The forecast is at $420, so not a huge gain, but it does think it's going to go up. And then when you look at the upper and lower confidence bound is -11%, upper confidence bound is at +13. So again, a little more bearish than bullish, but another one where the split is almost equal. So the math is saying, hey, not 100% sure what's going to happen here, but it is interesting to see that it has been on a downturn for the last couple months. I know that is something where I just talked about Forbidden Light. This is one where I'm going to take a bit of my own lessons from the past, and maybe if this drops into the $300 range, might be an awesome opportunity to pick this up, because I do think that the Zard from this is going to be a big chase for years to come, which can obviously drive value in the sealed product. So I'm going to be watching this one like a hawk. Now the very next one right here is Guardian Rising. Now Guardian Rising certainly hasn't been the most exciting booster box from a price perspective. You know, it's been pretty steady Eddie. You have these small kind of ups and then table and then up and then table, but for the math, that's a good thing, right? The math can jive with that. So the current booster box price right now, or at the end of December, was $346, and the new forecast is $360. So I mean, that's nothing to shake a fist at. That's pretty decent growth right there. And then when you look at the upper and lower confidence bound, the upper confidence bound is at +15%, and the lower confidence bound is only at -7%. So again, just like we saw with Team Up, like this is one of the sets, just like with Celestial Storm, this is one of the booster boxes where the math is more bearish than bullish on it, right? Like the math says, the math finds something in the equation here. The math thinks that there's opportunity for Guardian Rising to go up. Again, another Sun and Moon booster box that's under $350. So it will be interesting. In the last 2 months, you see that blue line, there seems to be just the ever slightest uptick there. So maybe the math is on to something, and we'll just have to see how it all shakes up. Now, finally, Sun and Moon. And I thought what was really interesting is Sun and Moon booster boxes right now are cheaper than Sword and Shield booster boxes, which is kind of crazy. You know, I would imagine, I don't know much about the print runs from Sun and Moon, and I don't know much about the print runs from Sword and Shield, but one would venture that there are fewer Sun and Moon booster boxes out there in the Poke space than there are Sword and Shield booster boxes. But who knows? The price certainly doesn't reflect that, or there might be less, but just not as much demand. So this is one that I'm really keeping an eye on, because again, I think getting this in, you know, $270, $280 range, I think from a long-term perspective, this is a really good buy. Now, here's what I will say is this. The current price is $270 and the forecast is at $276, right? So it's a little bit bullish here. The lower confidence bound is at -6%. The upper confidence bound is at +10%. So again, just ever so slightly on the bullish side of things. But this is one that the math doesn't expect it to light on fire. And really, if you forget about all the sharp ups and downs and bulls and all of that on that blue line, if you just were to trend line it out, that makes sense, right? It really has had slow and steady growth, which is one of my favorite things whenever I'm looking at data, and really one of my favorite things when I can find investments. Like, I would much rather have an investment that will go slow and steady up and to the right versus ones that go up and down and all over the place. You might get to the same point in the same amount of time, but I certainly prefer a slow and steady gainer versus one that makes me, sweat a little bit. So that's just how I invest. You guys know that I'm certainly more of a defensive investor. So very interesting to see Sun and Moon, and it'll be fascinating to see where it finishes up. Now, I always end you guys with a little summation here at the end, but with the exception of just a couple of these, there does seem to be this kind of feeling of either it flattening out or everything cooling off a little bit, which we've talked about a lot in other videos on this channel. Like, that makes sense to me. I understand why Sun and Moon got so hot, but you look at some of these Sun and Moon booster boxes and you compare them to like some of the XY era booster boxes and some of these other really premium products, and they're priced much, much higher. So it's going to be interesting if they can maintain that price. Again, sealed, it is hard to beat sealed. Sealed seems to go up and to the right over time, but the question isn't if it's going to come down. I think the question is how aggressive can it grow over the next 12, 18, 24 months. I think the growth patterns that we've seen just should not be expected moving forward, right? We'll hit some other catalytic event where the prices will spike, but I don't expect us to see that for a couple years. So some more moderate gains is something that I think we all should be looking for. And then Celestial Storm, Team Up, and Guardian Rising, those were the ones that the math favored the most this month. It'll be very interesting to look at this 3 months from now and see which ones actually ended up the winner. And then I love this because the forecasts do seem to be a little bit more in line, with the exception of those two where I just scratched my head. The forecasts seem to be more in line with what we're expecting. Those forecasts that we looked at for this last time, they seem to be a little bit low. So it's going to be interesting to see. A lot of the forecasts we looked at were only up, 10, 15, 20 bucks. When you consider most of these boxes are $400, $500, $600, from a percentage standpoint, that's not a huge growth over the next 3 months. So I think a lot of these are within range. It's going to be interesting to see if they hit those forecasts. Now, as I've said, I don't have a crystal ball. I really don't. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. There's all kinds of things that can happen, certainly in the geopolitical market, in the macroeconomic market. Like, there's all kinds of stuff going on in our world right now. But all I know is this math has been really accurate up to this point. It's going to be fascinating to see that if it can continue to be as accurate as it has been in the past. And at the end of the day, like, we have nothing to worry about because we are fully involved and invested in this awesome space that is Pokemon collecting, and things could be far worse. So listen, if you made it to the end and you enjoyed the content and you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, I'd really appreciate it if you did that. If you like what you saw, give us a thumbs up. Questions or comments, drop them down below. And listen, I appreciate you more than I can say. I hope you have an epic one, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye.